Take a seat, please.
Could we hold on just 1 minute because for some reason the time isn't synchronized and it's showing 5:59 on the thing. just just like 30 more seconds. Thank you.
A call to order the February 15, 2023 Fort Lauderdale Planning and Zoning Board meeting. If everybody will join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. So we obviously have a quorum. We've got everybody here this evening. I've got to my left Jay Scheckman on the end. Next to him is Brad Cohen. To my right is Bill Rotella. And also to my right is John Barranco. Down below we've got Steve Gannon and Patrick McTeague. And then we have Shari McCartney and Mary Furtick. All right. So before we get to the public swearing in, let's go ahead and get the approval of the minutes from the January 18th meeting. Anybody have any questions or corrections before we approve them?
Move to approve.
We have a motion by Patrick, second by Brad. All in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. If you plan on speaking tonight, please rise and raise your right hand and be sworn in.
Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you all. And before we hear the case, let's go ahead and have disclosures. Let's start. John, you want to start?
Yep, I'll be recusing myself on the first item.
Okay. Bill?
Could you state the reason?
The reason is they are my client. I did not work on this current project, but I have worked on this project previously, so.
Spoke with applicant's counsel.
Brad?
I don't know what's going on here. Hello? Oh, there we go. I spoke with counsel.
Jay?
No disclosures.
Steve?
Site visit and a voicemail from applicant's counsel.
Patrick?
Site visit, spoke with counsel.
Sherry?
I spoke with applicant's counsel.
And I visited the site.
And none for me. Okay. Thank you. Who do we have presenting this evening?
Good evening, Dwayne Dickerson on behalf of the applicant, attorney with the law firm Dene Miskell and Backman, offices at 14 Southeast 4th Street in Boca Raton. I'm here this evening on behalf of the property owner, who's Double Mountain Development Ventures LLC, as well as a developer who's Myers Group, and there are several of the development team representatives here. Yes, sir.
I can interrupt you for just a second.
Sure.
Because I did not announce the case number. So before
Yes,
you get
sir.
too far down the road.
Yes, sir.
First case up is UDP S22017. Sorry. Please proceed.
So also this evening with me, I have representatives from the development team, who's Myers Group, as well as the architect, which I know is on his way, Kobe Karp, and then the engineer of record, who's Justin Thompson with Kimley Horn. The subject site is located on the northeast corner of Cypress Creek Road and Andrews Avenue, as you can see in the red there on the screen, and it's just to the west of I-95. This is a zoom in of the site. The parcel is approximately 2.59 gross acres, and the land use is commercial. The zoning is now the Uptown Urban Village Northeast District. This is some of the previous conditions of the site. I'm sure you all have driven by the site over the years. It was in need of some TLC when the current owner purchased it. It had significant code enforcement violations and other safe structure issues. That client removed all of those code violations and ended up demolishing the property, which, in working with your staff and city officials, we believe that was in the best interest to move this property forward with the redevelopment. So tonight, we're here requesting a site plan level 3 approval to allow the property to be developed with a new mixed-use development that includes 200 multifamily residential units and approximately 3,000 square feet of commercial uses. As I believe you are aware, the Uptown Urban Village does allow for you to provide up to 3 deviations from the code. They are not variances. These are built-in deviations that the city permits, as this is a new master plan district, as you all are aware, and there's not one size that fits all. So you can request up to 3 deviations. We did with this project, and those deviations are as follows. The first one is to allow for the floor plate above level 6 to be approximately 22,488 square feet, rather than a maximum of 8,000 to 12,000 square feet, which is required by your code. Secondly, to have up to 20% of parking spaces for compact vehicles to be 8 feet by 18 feet for a total of 73 compact parking spaces, and we're calling them compact plus parking spaces. I'll explain that a little later. And then the third deviation is to decrease the tower setback from the north property line above level 6 from 30 feet to 16 feet, which is a reduction of 14 feet. As part of your code, the Uptown Urban Village District requires the allocation of residential flex units as part of the residential component, as the land use for this property is commercial. So that flex unit allocation is part of the site plan approval this evening. If you recall, I believe most of you were on the board when this project, or not the project specifically, but the site came before you, and that was in February of 2022 for rezoning. The property was zoned B3, which was the B3 county zoning. As you know, this area was annexed into the city several years ago, but there was never a city zoning district placed on the property. So as part of the planning for this development, we did rezone it from the B3 to the Uptown Urban Village Northeast. And it also went to City Commission in April of 2022 for first reading and in May of 2022 for second reading, and it was unanimously approved for the rezoning. This is the site plan. So as we discussed, there's a total of 200 units. Of those 200 units, 176 are market rate units, and 24 of them are affordable units in the moderate income category, which is discussed and permitted by your code. The site plan is as follows. So in the bottom is Cypress Creek Road, which is to the south, and to the left or the west is Andrews Avenue. You enter the site on Andrews Avenue with a right in, right out, or on the east side, which is Northeast First Avenue, and you can see the access points on the top right side there. Once you enter the site from Andrews, you can drop off, and there's a little circular drop off, and then there is a parking structure which allows you access to the parking structure both on the west side of the structure and the east side of the structure, and then you can see the ramp there in the middle. So it has significant access. The Cypress Creek Road is FDOT jurisdiction, and they would not permit any access point on Cypress Creek Road. So in working with your staff over the last year, we are able to provide those dual access points on Northeast First Avenue and Andrews Avenue without having any conflicts with FDOT's requirements on Cypress Creek Road. You can kind of see the layout of the ground floor. So on the left side, that teal color is retail, and that's approximately 3,000, just over 3,000 square feet of retail. And then in the middle area there, the green space, that is a landscaped park, pocket park, and that's just under 10,000 square feet. And then as it goes to the left or to the west, that is additional pocket park area and pavilion gathering area as required by the Uptown Urban Village Master Plan. You see amenities such as pools, there's a gymnasium, and there's also on the south side of the pocket park, there's a plaza and a gathering area. We are tasked with activating the rights of way, so all of those areas underneath this building are open to the public and have direct access from Andrews and from Cypress Creek, so you can have pedestrian connectivity into the pocket parks and the gathering areas throughout the site. The moderate income allows for up to 120% of median annual income. So that is the category of affordability that we are moving forward with. And one other thing I wanted you to know, the landscape pocket park area, as the building rises, that area is still visible and open as a courtyard area for all of the floors of the building as it rises. The building is 7 stories plus a roof. The roof is just the mechanical equipment, which is properly screened pursuant to your code with parapets and other screening equipment. So there will be no visibility of the rooftop equipment from the ground floor. Just want to briefly go over each deviation and let you know why we're requesting the deviation. So the first one, as we discussed, is to allow the floor plate above the 6th level or 6th floor, and there's only one floor above the 6th floor, which is the 7th floor, right? And we're asking to allow that to be 22,488 square feet rather than a maximum of 8,000 to 12,000 square feet. And what that allows for is the larger floor plate allows the building to focus more on the ground level pedestrian experience and provides the building with shape and movement centered around a pocket park that provides an attractive visual feature and enhances the pedestrian experience. Now, we looked at potential alternatives so we wouldn't have to request this deviation, and those were just not feasible, and we don't think they were in the best interest of this development or the city. For example, if we were to go higher or add mass, it would allow for a box-shaped, traditional box-shaped building in the units, and we'd ask for more units on some of the lower levels, and it shift the required green space to a less centralized area and detracting from the visual appearance of the building. Another option would have been to request a conditional use for increased height up to 150 feet, so we could pick up some of those missed spaces. But obviously, as you know, additional height would create more visual obstructions and detract from the natural light that can otherwise reach the pedestrian pocket park, and also detracts from the overall appearance of the building by creating more mass and detracting from human scale and otherwise creating the buildings, otherwise undermining the building's current design. So we feel that the deviation is the minimum deviation that still meets the intent and the vision of the Uptown Urban Vision Master Plan. And so this is kind of, as we talked about earlier, this area in green on the left side, that's the courtyard. So as the building continues to increase in height, that courtyard space is still visible from all of those interior elements and visible from the ground floor as you're utilizing those pedestrian areas. And then above the parking deck is a communal space as well. So the larger floor plate just allows us to focus more on those ground level pedestrian experiences, as well as providing the building shape and the movement centered around those pocket park areas and activating the streets as is very consistent with the very specific design guidelines in the urban Uptown Village. The second deviation request is to allow for up to 20% of parking spaces for compact vehicles, which would allow those compact spaces to be 8 feet by 18 feet, and there's 73 total what we call compact plus spaces. So your standard code parking space is 8 feet 8 inches by 18 feet. However, the code allows for a traditional compact space in parking garages to be 7.5 feet by 15 feet. So the reason why we're calling our compact spaces compact plus spaces because they're larger than the 7.5 by 15. They are the 8 feet by 18 feet. So they are larger than what your code typically determines for a compact space. And so the average compact space, 7.5 by 15, allows for a limited vehicle type such as your Toyota Priuses, your Mini Coopers, your Nissan Sentras, your Ford Focuses, your smaller vehicles. The Compact Plus space accommodates the larger vehicles, including most sedans, crossovers, smaller SUVs, and then the remaining spaces at the standard size will accommodate any of the other mid-size to large SUV vehicles and pickup trucks and so forth. We are providing your code-required parking. The one-bedroom units are 1.75 spaces per unit. The two-bedroom units are at 2 spaces per unit, and the affordable units are at 1 space per unit. All that's consistent with your code. So we are meeting the code-required total number of parking spaces for the entire project. And then the commercial was at 1 space for 250 square feet, and we have 3250 square feet, so that's another 13 spaces. Once again, we are satisfying that parking code requirement. And then this is the setback deviation of the north tower. So as floors 1 through 5 are required to have a 16-foot setback, and we do meet that requirement. But as you get to floor 6 and above, that step back is 30 feet, and so we're asking for floor 6 and 7 to be 16 feet in setback. So as you can see, the top circle area, that shows the 16 feet on that north side that we're asking for above the 5th floor. So like I said, 6 and 7. And that just pushes the tower towards the north and reduces the building mass along Cypress Creek Road. It was made very clear to us during the DRC process that the city wanted us to focus on activating Cypress Creek, reducing mass on Cypress Creek and Andrews and so forth. And this allowed us to do that by moving the amenities closer to Cypress Creek and stepping the building further back. And as you know, north of that is commercial, so we felt this was the least deviation that's appropriate. And these are some of the elevations of the building. So this is a view of the southwest corner of the property. So this is essentially if you were standing at Andrews and Cypress Creek looking into the site, this is what you would see. And this is a view along Cypress Creek Road. This is a view along, this is also Cypress Creek Road. So that's mislabeled. This is Cypress Creek Road. And what I want you to notice on this side is you can see the parking deck, which is on your right side, or that'd be the east side, and you can see how it's thoroughly screened. So all of the visual lights and all that are screened from view from outside the parking garage. This is another view along with the streetscape along Cypress Creek Road. An additional streetscape on Cypress Creek Road, and you can see the amenities area looking into the pocket park and the pool area that's right there. This is the southwest corner of the building as well if you're on Andrews and Cypress Creek looking towards the site. This is a depiction of the interior pocket park. You can see the areas meeting all the code requirements of congregation and giving residents and citizens of the city an opportunity to have meeting space and areas to play and enjoy the amenities. This is another view of the pocket park. As required by your code, we did have a community outreach meeting. We had a virtual community meeting held on December 22nd of 2022. All of the legal written notifications were sent to adjacent property owners, and they were mailed in writing based on the notice radius requirement by the city. And the meeting began at 6:30 p.m. Nobody attended the meeting, and so the meeting was adjourned at 7:05. I wanted to leave at 6:35, but I wanted to make sure that I gave people the opportunity to come if they were running late. And nobody showed up, as you all know. In my business, no news is good news. So while we like reaching out to the community, it's a good sign that if nobody comes, because that means you're on the right track with the development and that we have positive support. I haven't heard anything negative, only positive feedback, and we're really excited about being here. I think we may be the second project in the Uptown Urban Village. I think there are some others coming behind us, but this project meets the intent of this master plan. It, I believe, meets the requirements for residential housing in this area. I think it has a nice amenity with the mixture of uses and all the other things that it's providing. So we're excited, and I'm happy to answer any questions, and my team is here to answer any questions that you may have as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the applicant's attorney before we open up the meeting to a public comment?
I do, a little one. The top floor, 22,000-foot floor plate, does that include the communal areas? Is that what that, or only the units? There was
No, that's not the communal area. That's only the units.
all the units. Okay, thanks.
Yes, sir.
Just clarification.
Oh, I do have I wanted to ask you about the parking. So the Compact Plus, which I enjoy that name, the Compact Plus,
I could take credit for that. I didn't co- our
whoever came
architects
up, you should just take credit.
Be
'Cause, yeah,
compact minus. You got compact and a little bit less.
you should take credit for it. It's a great name. But putting that aside, how many spaces are required for the project? How many of those spaces are required as being mini, the compact spaces? So what my question is I know that you're offering these other alternatives, 8 foot by 18 instead of 8.8 by 18. Is there a requirement that you provide a certain number of 8.8 by 18, and that's why you're asking for the 8 by 18? So you're kind of asking it backwards, right? You're saying, hey, we want 20% of our compact spaces to be bigger spaces, instead of saying, hey, we're required this many 8.8 spaces, but we want a couple more of these 8 by 18 spaces to make up for the 8.8 by 18. It's not a very big deal. It's not like a breaking point for me,
Right.
but I just want to clarify it.
Sure. So based on the requirements of each one bedroom has to have 1.75 spaces per bedroom. Each 2-bedroom has to have 2 parking spaces per bedroom. So for the 1-bedrooms, that's 90 units, right? And that's 158 required spaces. For the 2-bedrooms, we have 86 2-bedroom units. These are just the market rate, right? And that's 172 spaces.
And I don't want to interrupt you, but are those full-size spaces, or can they be compact and full?
It's some of both. So the
Okay.
total number of spaces is 368 provided. Of those 368, 73 are compact plus. Did you say you didn't like compact plus?
No, I do like it. I
Okay,
like the
good.
name. I like the name. I don't know if I
saying
like
if you like it.
I don't know if I like them, but I like the name.
You like the name,
Right.
okay.
So I'm
that's
asking-
73 of the 368 are compact plus.
And is that provided, what I'm asking for, is that what you're asking us to do, is to say,
Right.
hey, some of those spaces, we can't provide full-size spaces, so to meet the requirement of the spaces per unit, we need to shrink down some of the spaces.
You are
That's-
100% correct.
Okay, that's what I wanted to ask.
So of the standard 8 feet, 8 inch by 18 foot space, we're asking for 73 of those to be reduced to 8 feet by 18.
Take 8 inches off each one of those.
8 inches off
those 73 spots.
out of 360.
Okay, that's all. I just wanted to clarify.
You got it.
Okay.
Anyone else? Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anybody in the public that would like to be heard on this item? Seeing none, hearing none, we'll close the public portion of the item and bring it back to the board for discussion and/or a motion.
I'd like to say that this project, we were encouraging population growth toward the uptown area, away from the downtown. It's taking care of, got some affordable housing thrown in, which is good. There's transportation near it. There's a mall, decent mall nearby. We're done by a top architect. I'm going to say it's only 7 stories, and I'm only saying that things have changed these days with the types of stories. And we're trading up from a problem strip mall. I mean, I think they've done a great job. I think it's worthy, absolutely, of the area, and it looks like everything should work out. It's helped get that area going.
Go ahead, Brad.
So I don't have a problem with the parking. Normally I do. Normally I'm a parking guy, but the 8 inches is not terribly bothersome to me. The 22,000 square foot versus the 8 or 12,000 square foot. I understand the argument, right? That we're letting more light in and stuff like that. But I think that the object of the code is that it shrinks as it goes up so that there is more light, as opposed to making one big mass structure. And not to say that this, believe me, I agree with you that what I saw, the drawing looks nice. Yeah, I'm not going to say it doesn't look nice. But I think it's there for a reason. I do think that this area was blighted before. I'm familiar with the area. I know that corner has been very busy. We had a project, and I think it was a different board. You might have been the chairman at the time. But it was a different board where they built like kind of like a strip mall, not a strip mall, but like a strip with different restaurants in it. And I had a real worry about the parking for that. And my worry was actually very valid, because there's very little parking, because I went there for lunch one day just to see if I was right, because I like to be right. And I went there for parking, and I went there for lunch, and it was almost impossible to find a spot. But putting that aside, I think that I'm happy that somebody is doing something with that, because it was kind of a disgusting little area. I think we can all agree that it was a nasty little area. But I don't know if I would be prepared to say, that level should be double, almost triple, but double of what the code provides. So that's what I'm wrestling with. I think it's a good project in terms of the design of the pocket park. I like everything about that open area. I'm just having a difficult time swallowing the setback on that 7th and 8th floor, and I don't know if it provides, if it's too big, it's too mass. It's not really broken up, and it seems like that design of getting smaller as it goes up has a purpose to it. That's what I'm having a problem with. So I don't know. If you want to address it, you can. It could just be me who has the problem and everybody else doesn't. That's okay too. But you tell me. Maybe you can convince me otherwise. Because you put on a nice presentation, by the way. This is the first time, I think, this is the first time you've been in front of us?
Yeah, it's been a while.
It's very nice meeting you, and you did a nice presentation.
Thank you.
But those are my worries.
Thank you, I appreciate it. When you said you like to be right, I said, you must be a lawyer. So I'll tell you, we've been working with your staff for over a year on this project, and you raised some very, very good comments. And we have wrestled about that for a long time. And guess what? So the alternative is going higher.
Right.
Right? We could have, this district allows you to go up to 150
Right.
feet. And it's a balance, right? There's 6 stories. We're only asking for 1 story that has that floor plate issue. The other stories are directly in line. And I hope that you would agree that all things being considered, I understand your point, but it's 1 story, and it allows us to accomplish everything we need to accomplish by doing this 1 story with that additional floor plate. If we want to get the additional units that we would lose by shrinking that floor plate, the only way you can do that is to go up.
Right.
And, I just really think that this design allows the light, allows the pocket park, allows the focus on the activity of the ground floor areas and everything else. And I think it's the right height, like was mentioned earlier, it's 7 stories. And I think going higher is a greater evil than the larger floor plate on that 7 story. So we've reviewed it all. We've looked at it all. Kobe's the best in the business, and we really just came down to, we think this is the perfect balance given all the things that we needed to accomplish. So I hope you would support
You've
that.
answered my question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to follow up to that real quick, though, but does the FAA restrict you from going higher at that spot?
That's another, so you have to go to the FAA with any project in this area, and FAA approved this project, but the higher you go and the closer you are to Fort Lauderdale Executive, you start to run those issues as well.
Can you go higher?
We did not. So we did not have those issues with this height. There are buildings that are higher than ours, I believe, so we don't think we would have had an issue. We probably couldn't have gone 150 feet, but we could have gotten an extra 2 or 3 stories that we would have needed to compensate for the loss of this one floor plate floor. So I don't think that would have been an issue that we would have exceeded whatever we could do with the FAA. But I think that's a good point. I think this modest height is once again in the best interest of the airport as well.
Does somebody else have a question?
I do. Well, I don't have a question, I just have a comment.
Go ahead.
I think this is so exciting. Brad, I went up about 1 o'clock, and I think I saw all your traffic I think it's actually right next door. It was amazing. I could not believe that many people were eating in the area. So all that told me was how exciting it is that we have this uptown zoning district, and I know when we had all the presentations and everything, it was kind of, I mean, I just find it very exciting this project's coming forward, and particularly that you've included an affordable element in it. So I know we wondered, will anybody take advantage of this? So it's good to see that happened. So I'm ready to make a motion to approve when you get to it.
Sherry, did you want to make a comment?
Just briefly, I wanted to say that I was thinking the same thing about that floor. And assessing the tiering, right? So, but if they're only 1 story above,
I don't know.
it would actually look kind of silly.
He's
if they did
swaying
that.
me. He's swaying me. I just want to tell your
So
clients,
I'm
the
not
man's swaying me.
bothered.
It's a good. He's a good oralist. This guy.
Well, there's got to be a reason why they're not, and it's probably a life safety issue that when you start going up to those higher floors, all of a sudden you're applying a different type of construction and code to it. So
I get you.
they're trying to create the affordability of
I
it.
got it. I got it.
You're exactly right. Once you get from mid-rise to high-rise, it's a game changer with the building code requirements, structural element requirements, and to have an affordable component, it has to balance. It really does.
Are there any other comments before Mary makes her motion?
I want to say nice job to the applicant and nice job to our staff for working this out with them. Obviously, you put a lot of work in it and made things happen.
Mary?
Okay, I move to adopt the resolution approving a site plan level 3 case number UDP S22017 based on the findings of the staff report and the testimony heard tonight, and find that the applicant meets the standards and requirements of the ULDR and criteria for the proposed use cited in the resolution. And yes, sorry, all the conditions are included in this motion. And thank you for for providing this for us.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Patrick seconded. Any
May-
further discussion before we vote?
May I read the resolution?
Would you please?
A resolution of the Planning and Zoning Board of the City of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, approving a site plan level 3 development permit for the development of a 7-story mixed-use development containing 200 multifamily residential flex units, which includes 24 affordable housing units and 176 residential flex units, 3,250 square feet of retail use, 2,595 square feet of gym, pedestrian plazas, amenity space, and a publicly accessible pocket park located at 6210 North Andrews Avenue, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, in the Uptown Urban Village Northeast zoning district, case number UDP S22017, and this includes all conditions in the staff report.
Thank you. So we have a motion and a second. Hearing no additional comment. Leslie, if you'll call the roll, please.
Yes. Mr. Scheckman?
Yes.
Ms. Spurtick?
Yes.
Mr. McTeague?
Yes.
Ms. McCartney?
Yes.
Mr. Gannon?
Yes.
Mr. Rotella?
Yes.
Mr. Cohen?
I want to tell you, your attorney convinced me. I was on the edge, to be quite honest with you. If not for him coming back and discussing this, it's a yes for me.
Thank you.
Chair Weymouth?
Yes. Motion passes
Motion is
unanimously.
8-0.
Congratulations.
I think a drink should be on the client tonight, right?
Maybe get a bonus.
Hey,
Or
guys.
something.
Thank you.
You did good. No, but I will now. He's very good.
All right. We're going to move on to our second case tonight, case number UDP T22007. Good evening, Ms. Logan.
Good evening, Planning and Zoning Board members. Do we want to wait just a second to clear out the room?
They're very happy. Talking about where they're going to treat them for dinner.
So good evening again. Tricia Logan, Urban Design and Planning, Principal Urban Planner. This item is on the proposed text amendment to the Historic Preservation Ordinance to provide a process to designate thematic historic districts citywide and to amend the historic preservation criteria and procedures. This item was deferred from a previous agenda from the October 2022 PZB meeting to provide staff more time to conduct outreach to the community. Following the October PZB meeting, staff scheduled a webinar to conduct this outreach, and invitations to the webinar were sent to members of the community through the Civic Association presidents and posted information on the city's calendar, the Historic Preservation webpage, the Nextdoor account, Twitter, as well as directly emailed certain members of the community who had expressed interest. We also put information on our website about thematic historic districts, about this proposed ordinance, and examples of other thematic historic districts that exist in other communities. For the webinar, there were 22 attendees, or 22 registrants for the webinar. And for the webinar, we only received one question, and it was related to application fees, which are something we haven't determined as part of this process just yet. After the webinar, we did provide the recording of it to those who did register just in case they didn't make it on the webinar, and they were emailed directly the link that's available on our website still today. And then we didn't receive any other comments during this public outreach period. So I wanted to give an overview of what the thematic historic district ordinance looks like, why we're doing it, and just refresh our memories a little bit. So thematic historic districts are slightly different from a traditional historic district, and that the properties that are included in the thematic historic district are not necessarily located in a continuous area, meaning the structures could be located throughout a neighborhood, several blocks, or potentially even citywide. And additionally, the properties that are within the boundary but are not identified as a thematic historic resource would not be reviewed by Historic Preservation Board or Historic Preservation staff for any modifications that are proposed to their properties. In a traditional historic district, the geographic boundary is defined, and any property within that geographic boundary would be reviewed by Historic Preservation staff or the board for any modifications to their buildings or properties. Just touching a little bit on the examples of the thematic historic districts, we do have these available online, so the full reports for each of them are accessible to anyone that's interested in taking a deeper dive. And most of them are related to just areas that are within a few blocks or a neighborhood. But there is one example listed, which is the Carnegie Library's Thematic Historic District in Philadelphia. And that one contains 25 properties that are scattered throughout the entire city. And they are thematically related due to their construction during a time period, 1905 to 1930, where they were funded by the Carnegie Corporation. So that is the basis for designation on that one. And just going in a little bit of how this fits into our existing code, we do have an existing historic designation process. This addition of the ability to designate a thematic historic district doesn't change that. So it just fits in with the existing timeline of receiving a complete application, taking it to the Historic Preservation Board. In this case, since it is a district, it would also come to the Planning and Zoning Board for review of the ordinance, and then ultimately to the City Commission. And again, it doesn't change who can submit a designation application. You can have submittals by the Historic Preservation Board, by them making a motion to initiate a designation application, the City Commission, by any property owner or group of property owners, and a nonprofit organization that's dedicated to historic preservation. We also have existing historic designation criteria that any group of properties that's looking to designate themselves as a thematic historic district would have to qualify under at least one of these. And they could qualify under any of them, and they're related to cultural significance, architectural style, several different things. Oftentimes with a historic district, they qualify under G or H. So those are more related to groups of buildings rather than just individual buildings themselves, but there might be different situations that are applicable depending on the situation. We also have application requirements that don't necessarily change as part of this. There is an inclusion of some specifications within the proposed updated ordinance that do delineate what you would exactly need for a thematic historic district, but otherwise it's the same basis of information that you would be providing for any other designation application. And just a quick overview of what else is included. It's just on your screen for reference, because there are some other aspects that are included within this proposed ordinance update. Just updated information for definitions, new definitions that are included related to the thematic historic districts, clarification of our application process. Some of the review criteria for certificates of appropriateness are updated just to be a little bit more relevant, and the language hasn't been addressed or changed for quite some time. Just some amendments to our administrative review process to add the ability for us to review site improvements at staff level, and then just some other miscellaneous edits throughout the text. And that concludes my presentation. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
I think before we open up to the board for questions, maybe open up to the public for public comment and then bring it back for the board comments, if that's okay with everybody. Good. Are you wanting to speak on this item, Courtney? As an attorney, do you need to be sworn in? Do you need to be sworn in?
Yes, we normally do it for attorneys too. But, you know, you don't have to on these kind of items.
I thought this
but,
wasn't
you know,
quasi judicial.
Yeah, it's not quasi, so,
I'm happy to be sworn in.
yeah,
I believe everything you say.
yeah.
Well, that's one. Good evening, Mr. Chair, board members. Courtney Crush, land use attorney with Crush Law. Wanted to share some constructive comments regarding the potential thematic district. Right now, as I read the draft ordinance and as Ms. Logan clarified to the board, properties that may share architectural style or a significant cultural moment anywhere in the city could be eligible to be a thematic district. Just reading that, arguably, I would think a 1950s ranch house in Rio Vista, one in Coral Ridge, and one in Crescent Park, as drafted, could be eligible to be designated based on their age and consistent architectural style. What the import of that is on neighbors, as well as on the property rights of the property owner, I think really needs to be thought through. I understand that there may be properties which have a very high or significant value or potential value that one might want based on a particular architect to designate, and they may not be geographically together, but the city has a process where it can seek individual designation of those properties for landmarks. So I don't agree that broadening or adding this secondary, non-geographically contiguous or even proximate option is something that it is worthwhile. I have a sensitivity to potential properties and districts under the current ordinance. As you know, and I'm sure Ms. Logan has reported, the city has been diligently getting grants and doing historical resources surveys throughout the city. And in many cases, it looks like it's about 12 neighborhoods at least. There are properties which have been identified as not independently eligible for designation, at least in the architectural professional's opinion, but could be contributing to a district. The definition of thematic district here doesn't distinguish again between contributing and individually worthy, if you will. So it seems as if you could move forward with something basically just because it's old and it may look similar, regardless of how you're linking it together throughout the city. And perhaps that was not the Historic Preservation Board's intent. And I'm not quite clear from the minutes what their goal is, but I think that implementing something with the language as drafted is something the city doesn't need because it has processes and is not beneficial to the city. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Courtney? Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else that's wishing to speak? Sir, would you like to speak on this item or just observing? Referee? Okay. Well, seeing nobody else in chambers, I'm going to close the public portion of this and bring it back up. So for those that have questions for Tricia, let's have at it. Mary?
Tricia, could you give us an example? I'm just trying, could you give us an example of something in the city of Fort Lauderdale that would fall under this, a specific example that would fall under this? I mean, there must be a reason why this came forward.
Well, it was part of a conversation with the Historic Preservation Board as they were discussing buildings along North Federal Highway between, I guess, Sunrise and Oakland Park Boulevard, and the number of 1950s modern commercial structures that exist along that boulevard. So it was part of the discussion included in that. We have been conducting several architectural resource surveys throughout the years that are grant funded. And from those, we do have one potential thematic district that was identified in Croissant Park that has multiple 1920s residential structures that are connected through their development history and also their architectural styles. So it's not just one thing or another. They were developed at the same time period by the same developer in the same style. They still retain a lot of architectural integrity, but it would be part of an evaluation process to determine if that is something that is appropriate in a particular scenario. We did not evaluate the North Federal Highway properties as a thematic historic district, and we did not evaluate, I think there was also another conversation about the McCarahan commercial structures that are located throughout the city and how they could potentially fit in within a thematic historic district, but that's not something that's been evaluated, or we don't have a study that relates to that. Does that answer?
Well, I guess it answers my question, but I guess I'm still unclear. So like, let's just take Croissant Park. I looked through I went to your webpage and I looked through some of your resource, it's identified. I didn't see that particular one. I did see others, but I'm just wondering, is that something that the neighborhoods have had conversation on?
So with the architectural resource surveys, it's a study that's conducted of the area. It's not moving forward with any type of designation. It's more as a planning tool that we can provide to the community, providing a background on the history of the neighborhoods, what could be potentially designated, what's considered significant architecturally, historically within their community, and it's a reference on our webpage that people can visit. But when we do these surveys, we do conduct outreach initially to the communities to let them know, at least through their civic association president, to let them know that we're starting the survey. After the survey is concluded, we do share that information and offer to come to their meetings to share that information and provide a presentation, but we haven't imposed designation as staff at the conclusion of the survey. So it's not something that has been discussed as far as moving forward with a designation.
Bill?
I'm just, between residential properties and commercial properties, if as a designation was made, what is the compensation to the property owner? Given the value of every piece of real estate in town at this point, if all of a sudden the brakes were put on for the ability to redevelop a property and at the value of properties and then the value of a redeveloped property, what is the compensation?
So with historic preservation, you don't get the brakes put on. It's just an additional review process where we're looking to make sure that any changes and modifications that are undertaken on that property are sensitive to the architectural significance of the building. So that doesn't prevent someone from doing an addition, from doing alterations. It's just an additional layer of review. We do have incentives available that are within the ordinance for historic preservation. We have the transfer of development rights program, which does allow property owners to qualify for excess development that they could potentially develop on their property and sell that to a new development in another location in the city. In the code, we have specifically defined what that means as far as a sending site, a historic property that's designated, and a receiving site, which would be the new development, and where those properties are located to do that. That's a private real estate transaction between those two parties where there is an exchange of compensation. But our code does allow for that process to take place. For commercial properties, we do have a tax incentive. It's a 50% reduction in taxes, both on the county and the city side, that's automatically applied with just the property owner filling out a one-page form with the property appraiser's office and providing the resolution saying that the property is designated in the city of Fort Lauderdale. But that's automatic for commercial properties, and it just has to be open 40 hours per week to the public, and that's the definition that's part of the state statute. We also have another tax exemption. If a property owner does improvements on their property, they can get a 10-year tax abatement on their property, so it freezes the taxes at the start of the project for a period of 10 years, which, depending on what's being undertaken, what kind of improvements are being put in place, would depend on what your return on that is. We also have other types of incentives that are more related to waivers when you're doing an adaptive reuse or parking reductions and things of that nature. So it's not necessarily monetary.
Okay. And is there an example of a property between Oakland Park Boulevard and Sunrise Boulevard? I mean, the older structures there are, some pretty seedy hotels and some things that, so I'm just kind of curious what if there's a specific property that.
Well, we do have an open application for designation for the Castro Convertibles building, which is on North Federal Highway, just south of Oakland Park Boulevard. And it was reviewed by the Historic Preservation Board last year and recommended for approval, but it's next scheduled for the City Commission. No, it's not the circular one.
The circular one's
Yeah.
the best one, right? That's the best thing we got right
The
there.
Miami carpets.
You
Is
know,
that
you
what
know
you're
what I'm talking
talking
about. That
That's
circle,
in
the Miami
that's in the
Carpets
city of
building.
Oakland
Is
Park.
that what you're?
Miami Carpets is the one? No, I'm talking
No.
about the one on the corner of Oakland.
That's in the city.
that the one?
Oh,
That's in Oakland Park, though.
That's the best one, right?
It's
That's the
located
one.
in the city
If
of
I think of
Oakland Park.
historic, I think of that. That's like our, in LA, they have the record.
Yeah, that
So which one are
property-
you talking about?
This property is a one-story commercial building on the east side of North Federal Highway.
Okay,
And it's called the Castro Convertibles Building.
Huh.
It's now Ferguson's
right?
building.
Oh, Ferguson's. They
Yeah.
they want that building to be designated historic?
It was initiated through the Historic Preservation Board for a historic designation application, and then the application was prepared by staff, and then was reviewed by the Historic Preservation Board and is scheduled for the City Commission in April.
And they're saying, yes, that's historic, that building?
The Historic Preservation Board has recommended approval
Right.
for that, and it was found that it met the criteria for
Crazy.
designation.
To me, that's crazy. I'm from Massachusetts. Can I make a comment? I'm from Massachusetts, right? And my town was founded, I don't know, in 16 something, right? When we talk about historic, they have like little stars on the houses, right? Historic is like, to me, well, where I'm from, Paul Revere slept here. Right. It's kind of historic, right? You would agree with me? Would you agree with me?
I agree that that is historic.
There's other things that are historic. I think there's some lovely buildings in town that to me, if it's a really famous architect or something, yeah, that's kind of historic. The Ferguson building, right? And I'm just giving this example because I think it was important that you've pointed this out, where they sell faucets and tubs, right? Are we on the same page?
Yes, that's
Okay.
the building.
That building, to me, and no slight to Ferguson because I buy tubs and faucets from them. That to me, that's not historic to me. That's a building, I'm sure you're going to tell me that's a very famous architect that put up a square. It's nice. It's got, I don't know. But I understand the worry that we have with this. I think it can be written better. I don't particularly, I don't think that we've looked at when you drop the rock in the puddle, the repercussions from that. I don't know. This is just me, I guess, on my soapbox. But what I find historic, when I see something knocked down, like in Victoria Park, I see a house that was built in like 1920. Again, it's 1920. It's a very nice cottage. Some of those I think are really nice, like those Key West conch houses. But I'm not going to tell Bob Smith, who owns a Key West conch house built out of wood, on a low level where it could flood out because I don't know what's going on with our streets. But every street in Victoria Park and every street out west floods like crazy. But putting that aside, I find it, I have a very hard pill to swallow to force people to say this should be historic and we're going to give you these things to make it historic. And then all of a sudden you have these buildings that are not historic that people put in to be historic, I don't know, for tax purposes or whatever. Never going to be redone, those buildings or houses. And to me, they're not really historic. I don't know. That's just my 2 cents. But everybody can vote the way they want to vote. I find this, I don't know. I just think that it limits what should be really historic, really in this town has not been really historic. Some things they've saved, which is nice. But the real things that are historic, I think they missed the ball on. And now we're kind of saying, anybody wants to come forward and tell us their house is historic, we'll make it historic, we'll designate it. And now the future owners of those homes are stuck with whatever that house is. They can only do a certain amount of things to that house. And is it really historic? I don't know. Yeah, I don't know the criteria there. So I'm not busting on you. I think you did a very nice job, and I'm sure everyone worked very hard on this, and I don't want to come off like that. Nor do I want to come off as a historic snob, because I'm certainly not. But I just think that this could probably be written a little bit more clearer and better. But that's my 2 cents. Go ahead.
I just have one more. In the case that you were referencing, does that require, at that point, the property owner to agree to have the property designated historic?
There are several options that are available for initiating designation, and one is through a motion through the Historic Preservation Board. Another one is a motion by the City Commission. Another one is just the property owners themselves. If, in this case, with a thematic historic district, it is a simple majority of property owners that would have to agree to submit an application, but it does go through a process.
Okay,
The
but in the
other-
case of this building, the Jennifer Convertibles building, that would require the property owner, everybody wants it historic. Does the property owner have to
No, under
ultimately
the
agree?
U.S. Supreme Court case Penn Central, the property owner's consent is not required. It's the U.S.
So-
Supreme Court has ruled on that.
Well,
So can I say that Rotella's property, I'm offended because Rotella lives in an old house. He wants to knock it down. I'm offended by that. Can I put in for historic on Rotella?
It
No,
depends. You can try to
on.
put it in, but on page 21 of the ordinance that we sent you, there is extensive criteria that they need to comply with. So it's not just anyone having a grievance with a neighbor or someone that did them wrong. They
Right.
have to actually comply with the existing criteria that we have in the code. The criteria to qualify for a historic ordinance, it is the same. We have not changed it.
So-
And that's on page 21 and 22 of the ordinance that you received.
So my question, though, is not if I have a beef with Rotella. I like Rotella. He's a great guy. But my problem is, if I like Rotella's house and I can find something in the past that makes it historic, I can then put in for Rotella if I meet those criteria, and he would have to, and they could make his house historic.
Well, you could only put in if you were either the city commission,
Right.
the historic preservation board, or the property owner, or a non-profit historic, so it's not an individual person. We don't allow that anymore. We changed that a few years ago.
Okay.
Just out of curiosity, has the owner of the Castro Ferguson building been made aware that their property is being considered for historic designation?
Yes, they are represented by Stephanie
And
Toothaker.
they've opened their arms and they've said, great, finally we can get that done? Or are they combating it?
The hearing has been continued, so we really don't know anyone's position on it because the hearing has been continued until April. So no one has given any testimony on that case.
Jay, did I see your hand
Can I
up?
ask, can I go back to this thematic historic district? So in this case, one of the things you mentioned was an architect. So if you did a thematic district of an architect and you picked out 5 properties or 10 properties or whatever, could other people come along and say, but wait a minute, we really have, 20 properties or 100? How does that work? How does it work that other people are going to?
You do have the ability to amend historic districts through the ordinance. So it's an amendment to an existing ordinance if it were already designated and you want to add structures to it at a later date.
And who would initiate that? Just the same?
I mean, if a property, it would be through the same process. It would be
Okay.
one of the
And
entities.
what's the threshold for this thematic historic district? Is it a simple majority, did you say, or was that for the
If the
historic?
property owners would like to initiate a designation, it would be the simple majority of the property owners.
And what if the Historic Preservation Board wanted to?
Then they would have to make a motion and have a majority of the members of the Historic Preservation Board vote in favor of moving that forward.
Without okay.
Yeah.
John?
I'm not sure if this is on. It is. Wow. So I just wanted to go back to Mary's original question. Because the one thing she said, and you answered part of it, but she said, what's the reason? And that's what I'm having the biggest problem with here is if you can go through the process on Castro convertibles and you're well through the process, why are we going to put a bunch of buildings in the same bag when I can just go and pick each one of these buildings and judge them each on their merits rather than just throwing them? I mean, identify the problem for me, because without a problem, why are we creating a solution? I guess my question. Is there a problem? What's different about what you're proposing versus how it exists now?
So to be clear, this came from the Historic Preservation Board, not from staff.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. And then it was
I
further
should-
supported by the City Commission. So it was requested in that
So
fashion.
did they identify a reason?
it was surrounded by the conversation related to the properties on North Federal Highway and also the McCarahan commercial buildings that are located throughout the city, but not necessarily, it's not a contiguous area of properties that would be eligible for designation as, you know, a traditional historic district. So in those scenarios, they were looking for another option to provide.
I'm not sure why the first option that we all have before us that we can use, why wouldn't that be still a usable option?
I think you can look at examples of other thematic historic districts and why it was of particular importance to those communities to designate in a thematic way rather than in a traditional historic way, particularly with the example of the Carnegie Libraries in Philadelphia, where they were built as part of an initiative through the Carnegie Corporation, through the city, to build libraries and resources for the community, and they're not next door to each other. So they wanted to find a way to honor those buildings, but you can't do that collectively through an individual designation, and you can't do that collectively through a traditional historic district. So
Could you explain that then? Why would I not be able to take the 10 buildings in the Carnegie example you gave?
you could individually designate them, but are you telling the story collectively of why they're important as a group, why there was this initiative in 1905 to build all of those libraries during a short amount of time, what the community need was? So it's a way to express the history in ways that we can't do with our existing tools. So I think that's why there was an interest in pursuing this as an option for designation, so that in instances where it makes sense to have that option for designation, you have that ability and that process to go through to express the history in that fashion.
I just have to say, I'm sorry I'm interrupting, but I have to say, just because I think of the historic properties we have in this city, and I think it is possible to tell a story whether they've been individually designated or not, because we do have many of those buildings, and we tell that story all the time about our city. So I appreciate that you didn't bring this. I guess I still in my mind can't grasp that you have an architect and you start designating every building that that architect has designed, regardless of where they are. And I don't know. I mean, I don't really understand that. I understand some of the other districts that you showed us, but I just haven't the local ones. I guess maybe we just don't, a prophet in his own town or something.
And I hate to say it, but it sounds like they're casting a bigger net out to collect all these things into one, group, thematic district, when they should be looking at each one, based on its individual qualities that make it historic. And just because this architect designed 5 buildings doesn't mean that all 5 buildings are his greatest work. I mean, we've all designed stuff we're not proud of, right? Here I am. I'm an architect. I've done things.
You're admitting to that here tonight. Okay.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it just bothers me that it almost seems like it's the emperor's new clothes, right? So we're all looking at all these other districts that were created in other cities that, Philadelphia, that's where the Liberty Bell is, and, our founding fathers. And I get it when you're dealing with that level of history, but we don't have that level here. I think individually we have some great historic structures here. I'm afraid to overregulate when nobody's given me a reason why we need this. So that's my fear.
Mr. Chairman?
Sure.
I just wanted to jump in along the same lines. I think this has potential to be a horrific overreach, and I'm very concerned about that. If we have a process where you can individually designate, I think we do that. The potential to encumber property, and especially in the process where others bring it up and you're kind of ensnared, I just don't think it's good public policy.
Anyone else?
I guess I can make a couple comments. I'm just curious, do you know if they looked at, you keep mentioning the Sunrise Corridor and so forth, Why didn't they just look at making that the district? If there's so many good pieces of architecture, how did it morph into the whole city? Is one kind of question. I mean,
Well, we don't have the tool available to us to designate that area as a historic district because it doesn't qualify. Because it's been a while since I've looked at it, but say there's 100 buildings along that corridor, 11 of them, 12 of them fit the criteria, fit the description of what the board was discussing at the time. So do you want to designate 100 buildings basically as part of a historic district with majority of them non-contributing?
no,
Typically
but
what
maybe
we
you could
want.
do the overarching thematic district with those 11. I don't know. I think we're all concerned that it's more than just this one road that we have the best examples on, and it's become every neighborhood. I mean, so is Francis Abreu a thematic district, and therefore at once all of his homes would be protected?
It wouldn't really function in that way because you would still have to put together a report. You have to analyze each individual structure to make sure that it does have the architectural integrity and meets the criteria that's outlined in the code. So you're still evaluating the group of properties to see that they are making sense as a thematic historic district. You're not just saying, oh, it's a Francis Abreu property, so let's put it in there without any further analysis involved. There's multiple Francis Abreu properties. They may not all make sense in a thematic historic district because there's different types of buildings, there's different construction periods, there's different details, there's different levels of intervention that has happened on those structures over time where maybe they've lost architectural integrity and don't qualify for historic designation. So it's an overall analysis that has to be undertaken to determine, do they qualify as a thematic grouping?
Are we actually voting on anything tonight?
Yeah.
On like a recommendation?
Did he do it?
Yes, a recommendation for approval or denial
Yeah.
to the city commission,
So-
and then they make the decision.
But I have a, oh, wow. I have a question. Why, like, let's say that the Broward Historic Trust or the Broward, or the Historic Preservation Board has 5 properties that they think should be historic. Why can't they just say at a meeting like this, we move to designate these 5 properties as historic? What is the need of the thematic district? Just less paperwork?
I think it's the perspective that you gain from designating them as a thematic historic district rather than individually. So if you have a grouping of buildings, you're understanding, like I was talking about before, the history of why they're placed together. You would still elaborate on the individual buildings, the architectural features that are represented, specifics about the individual buildings, but it's another tool and another resource to use when you're pursuing a historic designation.
Anybody else? I concur with almost everything I've heard here tonight, so I'm not going to continue to pile on. The one thing I haven't heard that I take a little bit of issue with, as I sit here, and I don't think heard anybody on this board that is embracing this and moving forward with it, which begs the question for me in that the way that we do our outreach, when you've got the variety of different thematic opportunities here, whether it's a style or an architect or a location, I don't understand how you only get 10 to 20 people that respond to this kind of thing. I mean, I would think that it would be overwhelming. And I think by going about it by having a webinar in hopes that somebody goes on the city's website to hear about it is not the way to do it. You've got an idea of what you're wanting to bring into the corral to put under the thematic district. And I think you go to the people that own the Castro building, you say, this building is being considered, and we want to know what you think, because that's the person that owns the property. I think I would imagine, and Bill, you can maybe answer this, or one of the attorneys, if somebody were trying to sell the Castro building right now, you'd almost have to make a disclosure to the potential buyer that this property is being considered for historic designation. That dramatically affects the value of the property.
So I don't really know what crosses the line versus, right, my day-to-day job and sitting here. But at some point in time, when there was a notice on this property, right, that was going to be historic. So actually, my office is close by, so I drove by that notice, not knowing if it was what the notice was for. Maybe they were going to tear it down and do something different, to see that it was historic designation. And at some point in time, I've also have talked to Stephanie about it, and so when I say cross the line, I know you say there's nothing on record, so I don't want to be the one putting anything on record, and you're raising that microphone like, stop?
Well, it's just that we haven't heard
Okay.
any testimony yet in that case, and, it's up in April, but
Okay.
I think that we should probably consider it as just an ordinance for the city versus anyone's particular application, because that is an individual designation.
Right. It just kind of frightened me when you stated that it doesn't require the property owner's consent. And again, I know we talked about a lot of let's call it potential benefits that a property owner can get, but I'm not a land use lawyer, so I don't know if you take this piece of property and, and you could go 150 feet on a piece of property, that you're going to ever be compensated for what you might get by the benefits that you were describing before. In that particular case, I know that these guys just bought, the people that own they just bought this building maybe 3 years or so ago, and they bought that property as a net leased investment. So when they bought the property, I don't think there was any intention that they were thinking that there was some historic nature to it. They bought it because they wanted to own a piece of property on Federal Highway that had an income stream, with some given cap rate to it. But
what would prevent us from creating thematic district, but the way that it's created is that you select already designated historic properties and then contribute those to a thematic district, as opposed to using thematic district as a means to designate?
I think what you're asking is,
I think that already happens.
yeah.
I think we have historic buildings in town, and we know them. We know we have the New River Inn, the Stranahan House, the Bonnet House. We could go on. Those are buildings that have been, that we're familiar with, right? I think the answer somebody gave here was that you could accomplish what you want by single designation, and you have a process for that. And to create this and listen, I have tremendous respect, and we all know I love history, and so I just, I love all things history, so let me start there. But I think there's a process in place to accomplish this without putting this extra layer on, which, from what I'm hearing people say, no one really understands. So I don't know. I don't want them to think we don't appreciate the work they've done. They've done some tremendous work in this town, but
I'm hearing from Tricia that there is a distinction, that there is a certain benefit in having a thematic district when you have a grouping of properties that share similar characteristics. So, maybe you can speak more to that, but back to my question, why wouldn't you be able to achieve that same end result by creating thematic districts out of properties that have already gone through the process of individually being designated as historic, versus using a thematic district as a way to bundle a bunch of properties in their designation?
If it were to be warranted, you can certainly include properties that are already individually designated into a thematic district, but it wouldn't be exclusive from one or the one way. You wouldn't necessarily, I think what you're saying is you would designate each property individually and then form a thematic historic district.
think that's kind of what everybody's been alluding to here, that you have the process in place to do it, but it would be done individually rather than collectively. And
I mean,
Okay.
I mean, it's when you have these city or third-party initiated designations, it can be very controversial for the property owners. And, you know, we have the process that we have allows for everyone to be heard, for all of the facts and criteria of each of the property to be like on the dais, the focus of everyone's attention, so that everyone can make a clear determination as to that individual property's eligibility for historic designation. I do have some concern about initiating a designation with a grouping of properties and then losing the, you know, the tunnel vision that is in our current process to really vet each property individually.
John?
And I agree with what Jay is saying, because you stay hyper-focused and evaluate each property based on its merits. And then of the ones you designate, you could pull them together and say, hey, this is a thematic district. And I still don't know why we're doing a thematic district. So, to clarify, let's say on Federal Highway, I have Castro convertibles. We'll call that an A site, right? Then we've got B, 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 and I got another A site. And then B and another A site. Does anything happen to those B sites? Are they affected by neighboring a historic building? They're not.
They're not affected by the ordinance where they would be reviewed by historic preservation staff or the historic preservation board.
So they're still considered individually. So the A site is a historic site. The other A site's a historic site, but the only site that would maybe be affected is if you neighbor one of those properties, then your property rights may be affected somewhat, because if I develop a high-rise next to the Stranahan house, well, we saw it happen on the beach. Yeah, and Stranahan house.
I think they did that next to the Stranahan house, so, yeah.
And there's a lot of pushback on that. But it will affect neighboring properties. So the thematic district doesn't create a boundary anywhere around these things. It's just a box we're putting them in.
You do describe the extents of what boundary the properties are located within, but only the properties that are identified as what we're describing as thematic historic resources would be the ones that are under the purview of the ordinance and be reviewed through the Historic Preservation Board and through Historic Preservation staff for modifications. With properties that are being redeveloped that are directly adjacent to historic structures, the process in the past has been a review and comment by the Historic Preservation Board to weigh in on any potential adverse effects on that neighboring historic structure of the new development.
So the designation as an individual property versus a thematic district property makes absolutely no difference in the review of the adjacent property or the subject property. It's the same review either way.
Correct, yeah.
So I don't get why we're doing a thematic district. So I'm back to the same point that you brought up originally. What is the problem? What was the reason why we're doing a thematic district? Unless it's some way of short-circuiting the actual process for an
This can be
individual.
accomplished by the existing ordinance, so.
Right.
All right. Can we, what do we do, make a motion here?
So,
Yes, so you would, if you don't support it, then you would just make a recommendation for a denial to the city commission, and then the city commission will make the decision. And you probably want to say in your motion, you know, maybe based on all the statements on the record or something. Just,
Okay.
Yeah.
Based on all the statements on the record, I make a motion to not recommend. How's that?
Recommend denial of the ordinance to the city. commission.
Recommend denial of the ordinance to the city. I need my lawyer here.
we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
John Barranco seconded. Any further discussion before we vote? All right, please call the roll.
Mr. Scheckman,
Yes.
Mr. Baranco,
Yes.
Ms. Spurtick,
Yes.
Mr. McTeague,
Yes.
Ms. McCartney,
That's yes to deny. Yes.
Mr. Gannon,
Yes.
Mr. Rotella,
Yes.
Mr. Cohen,
Yes.
Chair Weymouth.
Yes. Motion is
9-0 to
unanimous
deny.
to shoot it down, to deny it, sorry. All right, before we adjourn, we've got a brief presentation as a follow-up to the Central City rezoning that we discussed at our last meeting.
Good evening. The city manager's office and the district commissioner asked us to come back and do a brief introduction to our next steps and to also move the item for, rather than waiting for the April PZB meeting, bring it to the March PZB meeting.
My apologies, can you just introduce yourself for the record?
Oh, sure. Lorraine Tappan, Urban Design and Planning. And just to kind of give you where we've been and where we're going, we've had about 8 meetings in total to date on the subject of the rezoning for the Northwest Quadrant. And in preparation for bringing the item back to the March PZB meeting, we've scheduled a meeting for the public. Mailers are going out in the next couple of days. On March 1st. This would be at 6 p.m. here in the City Commission chambers. We looked at going to a venue closer to the area. Thurgood Marshall Elementary School was not able to accommodate a meeting for us. And then we also looked at a couple of other places nearby, including Lauderdale Manors Park, but the parking was so limited that we didn't think it would be feasible to have the meeting there. So we kind of looked at all our options, and we came back to here in the commission chambers where there's ample parking, and it's not that far from, it's still not close, but it's not super far from the area. Just going back a little bit, the Central City CRA did a lot of outreach and a number of workshops between 2018 and 2021, and wanted to make sure that we also share that the cost for getting the word out has been, it's been significant, the investment, $20,000 before we got to working on this specific zoning request this past, in 2022. So the mail notice that we have prepared to alert the property owners and those within 300 feet of the area will go out in Spanish and Haitian Creole. And we'll also be emailing the neighborhood associations, South Middle River and Lauderdale Manors. We plan to contact the attendees from the Planning and Zoning Board meeting the last couple of times, all phone numbers. So we'll just give them all a call and invite them to the upcoming meetings. We're going to have sign notices out. And then just want to make sure everybody knows there's a cost for the extra public participation meeting. We expect the next one will be $1,000. And to date, the cost on notifications has been $22,000. Also in conversation with, and based upon input that we received from the Planning and Zoning Board, where we'd like to put out a recommendation to bifurcate the area where the block along Powerline Road plus the west side of Northwest 8th Avenue, we would recommend that move to RM15. That way, both sides of 8th Avenue would have the same zoning district and potentially similar development would face each other. Then from the eastern portion of that middle block there, outlined in pink, we would recommend that would go to RD 15 with, just a few more options for types of residential development, but not as many as RM 15. And I'm here for any questions.
Why the sense of urgency from the city manager's office to get this done?
I was not provided that explanation. I don't know. I do not know.
Someone
But we
does.
were
Here he
given-
comes.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, no problem. Hey, good evening, Chair, board members. My name is Chris Cooper. I'm the Director of the Development Services Department. As you know, this has been an ongoing effort for many, many years, and we feel like we're very close to being to where we need to be to get something really needed in this area adopted, and so we do want to bring it back to you sooner rather than later. I think when you asked at the last meeting, I think there was a question, how long do we need? And I think April came up as a date. But what we found, based on what we've learned about the folks that came out to the last meeting, why they were here, and the outreach that we've done and plan to do in the next week, that we could actually bring it back in March. So I don't know if it's necessarily a directive, but I think what we want to do is get this back before you in March and get it back up to the commission soon thereafter. So that's why we want to bring it back in March. I think we overestimated a little bit the last meeting of the time we needed. I think we're going to be able to get this back to you in a form that you want, and with the outreach that you asked for in March. So that's why we want to bring it back to you next month.
My only concern is because when these people were here, a lot of them had tremendous, I mean, they were scared. They were scared. And I just don't want them to think that, okay, we're rushing this back in. So that's, I'm just trying to understand whether they're on board with it, because I don't want them to be here in April going, hey, you said April and we're here.
So Chair, as Lorraine mentioned, we're going to reach out directly. We have all their phone numbers, and we can let them know about the meeting next week, and also that the item could be and hopefully will be scheduled in March. To be frank, we did some follow-up, and we have talked to some of those people and done some research, and we found that a lot of those folks that were here that night do not live in the area that's affected by this. There were some messages spreading around in the areas outside, particularly west of 9th Street, that made them a bit fearful of what was going on in the neighborhood next to them and how that might affect their neighborhood and what the city may come in and do there. So I don't know if that's all those folks, but we found that was some of those folks and why they were here and why they were afraid of what we were doing that night. But again, we have all their contact information. We're going to reach out to them. We're going to call them, invite them to the meeting, let them know what's going on. They will not go unnoticed that we move this up to March if that's what you allow us to do.
Any other questions for the city before we adjourn?
We originally, I think I made the motion, said March, and you all asked for April. So I don't care. To me, and I think your point was really good, Mike, that the people here heard what they heard. But one of the things that concerns me is, I don't think we second guess a lot of the speakers that come up here. And I don't want to make the mistake of second guessing some of them because we think they might not have had a valid reason to object. And I appreciate that you all have done a lot of outreach on this. I was just saying to Lorraine before the meeting, and I think some of you who've been on the board will remember that I asked for a presentation on the Central City CRA a couple of years ago, and the city attorney told us we couldn't do it. So it's just ironic to me that we've ended up in this situation, but if it's somebody's home and we make them feel better, and I quite frankly, at the last meeting, I know I sound like I'm rambling, but I left here and I reflected on what Jay said and what you said, and I think you all provide a lot of helpful information to the people that were here. And so as many meetings as we can have to make people feel comfortable about our city, I think that's good. I have no problem with March as long as we widely do it, but I really don't. I would just really ask that we take at face value some of the comments that were here and not second guess them, because I don't think we do that with anybody else.
No, and I don't want to suggest we were second guessing them, but we genuinely wanted to know why they were here, what their thoughts were, what their concerns were, and whether they're in the area that's affected or not, or outside the area and fearful that this is going to lead to something else that could affect them. We do genuinely want to address those concerns and talk them through it and be able to help them feel better about the situation. So not second guessing, not discounting them any way whatsoever. We obviously have their numbers. We want them to come. We're going to invite them regardless of where they live and try to help them feel good about this as well.
Okay. Anything else? Anything else for the good of the city or communication to the commissioners?
Well, do we have to formally decide? to move the date?
What's that?
Do we have to formally decide to move the date?
I don't think this calls for a vote. It wasn't,
I suggest doing a vote, because we generally can't just put it on the agenda, change it just like that without the board doing an action. So I suggest a vote to make that clear.
do we need a motion?
Yes, please.
Does anybody want to make a motion?
This is a motion to, we can make a motion to approve or disapprove, right?
Make a motion to move it up to March or not?
So motion to move this item to the March meeting as opposed to the April meeting.
Oh, I'll make the motion just to move this along. I'm not saying a motion to move the hearing to March from April.
Yes, to the March meeting.
I'll second that to keep it moving on.
We're moving. All right. Any further discussion before we vote on this? Leslie, please call the roll.
Mr. Scheckman,
Yes?
Mr. Baranco,
Yes.
Ms. Fertig,
Yes.
Mr. McTeague,
Yes.
Ms. McCartney,
Yes.
Mr. Gannon,
Yes.
Mr. Rotello,
Yes.
sorry, Rotello, Mr. Cohen,
Yes.
Chair Weymouth.
Yes.
Thank you
We will
very
hear it
much.
in March. Thank you.
Can we get clarification what that date is?
Can we do what?
The clarification of the March date?
It's the exact same as February because it's 28 days later. It's March 15th.
Oh, perfect.
4 weeks to the day. All right. Seeing, hearing nothing else, this meeting is adjourned.
You have to make the motion to adjourn.
What do we have to make a motion?
He can just adjourn. He doesn't need a motion under the rules.
Okay.